Hi, good evening, everybody. This is Sahil from MedSchoolCoach. I hope everybody can hear me okay. I'd like to thank everybody for logging on and joining. I hope that this session is helpful for everybody, especially in regards to the application process. I know that poll we just had up showed that a lot of you guys are applying to med school this year, either as first-time applicants or second-time applicants, and it can be a very, very stressful process. The whole thing is, pardon the colloquial terms, a pain in the butt sometimes. It's definitely very difficult. It's something that students and their parents can have a hard time going through. So what we're hoping to do here is make it a little bit easier, have it so that we can get you a little bit more familiar with the whole application process in general, and just give you a little bit of hints and tips along the way to hopefully get you to a point where you're going to be more comfortable with the process, where you're going to be somebody who is at least familiar enough with everything that's going on in order to, put together the strongest possible application. Obviously, we can't go over every single point of every part of everybody's application, but the goal for me today is to just give you a brief overview of the most important parts and give you a few tips and tricks along the way that will hopefully let you truly put together a great application at the end of the day. So the other awesome thing we have going today is I'm joined by Anthony from Next Step Test Prep, who is one of the MCAT tutors at Next Step Test Prep. And as most of you guys know who are applying this year, there's this whole new MCAT coming out. And that is something that it's a beast in and of itself. And we want to talk to you a little bit about it, what the process is, and Anthony's going to take you through it a little bit in detail. So why don't we get started here, just talking a little bit about navigating the medical school application process, as well as the new MCAT. So what I want to make sure to cover today is give you guys an overview of the entire application process. It's all about timing. It really is. And so I definitely want to lay out a little bit of the timeline. I want to talk a little bit about the AMCAS, what it means, what it is, as well as the activities section, the transcripts and grades, the letters of recommendation, of course the new MCAT, and everything else that's going to go with the application, specifically your personal statement. And we're not going to delve too much into depth about the personal statement itself. That's something that we will definitely get to in great detail a little bit down the line. But today I just kind of want to give you a brief overview of it so you can kind of get a quick taste of it. So let me talk for 1 second about the whole application timeline. Now, this is a daunting slide, but I think it's really important for those of you who are going through the process to just get a general idea of when things need to get done. And so let's start with right now. We're right now in mid-February. And so what do you have to do between February and really next fall when you start med school to get an acceptance? And there's a lot of different processes and a lot of different steps along the way. And so I want to kind of take you through a few of the most important ones. Now, a lot of people think, oh, the application it doesn't open until May, June. I don't have to worry about it until then. And a lot of people see deadlines as late as December, January. A crucial mistake that a lot of people make is waiting that long to start your application. Just think about what you're putting into this. Your 4 years of college are basically coming down to whatever you're putting on this application. That is all you have. All the activities you've done are great, but they don't make a lick of difference if you can't put them on paper in the correct way. And so, the application is all about that. It's about how to put the things you've done for the past 4 years on paper. So I want you to start thinking about this early. I want you to start drafting your personal statement now. I want you to start drafting your activities section now. And I also want to make sure that you're filling in any gaps you have in your application. So that means, do you have any gaps when it comes to shadowing experience, when it comes to research experience? You still have time. You have a couple of months to fill that kind of stuff in between now and when you submit your application, and it's important to start thinking about it. The other thing that a lot of you are going to have to do is take the new MCAT. I know a bunch of you probably have taken the old MCAT already, but a lot of people have to take the new MCAT. And so obviously that's something that you're going to have to do between now and when you apply. In May, that's when the AMCAS opens up. That's also when the Texas application opens up, as well as the osteopathic application. Now, some of you guys out there may be also applying to osteopathic schools, may also be applying to Texas schools. So it's important to keep in mind that the timelines are a bit different, but not completely. I think in general, these dates hold true. So AMCAS opens in May, and that means you can start filling out information onto your AMCAS application. That doesn't mean you can submit it, because the first time you can actually submit your application is in June. But you can start filling out your demographic information then. Basically, once you submit that application, then you're going to get to July to September when you're going to get secondary applications. Those are the multiple essays that most medical schools have you write. You can get anywhere from 1 to 5 essays per secondary. And in general, most of the schools are going to send you secondaries. So don't think for a second that just because you apply to 30 schools, you're not going to get 30 secondaries because schools are going to screen you out. The reality is that most schools do not screen for secondaries. So at any number of schools you apply to, that's how many schools you're usually going to get a secondary from. In September is when interview season starts. You're going to start getting interviews as early as September. The interviews last all the way up until March. You might get some acceptances early, and that's great. For non-rolling schools, you might interview and you might get an acceptance a few weeks later, and that's a huge load off your back and a lot of pressure relieved. You might not get acceptances early, though. You might have to wait all the way until really early March at the earliest to start rolling in acceptances, because that's when non-rolling schools send out admissions decisions. And non-rolling schools are basically those schools that kind of interview candidates as they go along the year, but won't actually make a final decision until all their candidates have been interviewed and everybody sits down in one big meeting and kind of decides who's in and who's out. That happens in March. They send out their acceptances then. I would say probably the majority of the schools are actually non-rolling. Maybe 25% of the schools, the majority of the schools are rolling decision, so that you'll get your acceptances as you go along. The minority of the schools are non-rolling admissions, and you'll get those in March. By May 15th, you got to only choose one school to be at. That's when you have to kind of say, okay, this is the school I'm going to be at, because that allows the schools to then have waitlist movement. So you're going to get waitlisted at schools. Some people are only going to get waitlisted at schools and are really going to hope to get in and are waiting for that moment when somebody turns on acceptance and a spot opens up. And then next August to September, you're going to start school. And believe it, that's almost a year and a half away, more than a year and a half away, but we're starting to think early about this process. Unfortunately, for some people, they're going to have to start the process all over. Med school is competitive. 50% of people are not going to get in. Over 50% of people are not going to get in. And that stinks, but that's the reality of the situation. So part of what we try to do at MedSchoolCoach is kind of make your application as strong as possible. Obviously, your grades and MCAT score make a huge difference in that, but so do your essays, so does your personal statement, so does how you interview. Oops, sorry. I also want to just draw you guys' attention to the chat function. If you guys have any questions as you go along, feel free to type them in and send them to the presenters. We will try to answer the questions either as we go or probably all the way at the end. But feel free to type them in as you go so that we have a running list of questions that we can go over. Let me talk briefly about the AMCAS application, right? So what is this? This is the centralized application that goes to virtually all U.S. medical schools, U.S. MD schools. It's basically the common application. You fill this out once and you kind of send it to all the different schools and they get it. Now, Texas has its own version. They have their own sort of common app. It's called the TMDSAS. And osteopathic schools have a similar version, which is basically called the AAO-COMAS. The differences between these three applications are rather minimal at the end of the day, but there are three different applications that you have to eventually fill out. Now, you might think, okay, this is great. The AMCAS is a common application. I get to send one application and I'm all done. I kick back and I'm completely done. Unfortunately, the reality is that's not really true. It's one application to send, but every school is going to have a secondary application. That secondary application, as we talked about, can be anywhere from 1 to 5 essays. So the AMCAS is really just the primary portion of the application, and then you're also going to have to do the secondaries as well. So what are the dates? What are the dates that you need to know and you need to be in line with? You know, as with most things in life, being well prepared is extremely helpful. So submitting early is extremely helpful. You're going to see deadlines for schools on their websites as late as December and January of any given year. But the crucial mistake that people make is thinking that, okay, I can apply that late. The reality is you can't. You cannot apply as late as December and January because most schools are rolling, and even schools that are non-rolling are rolling with their interview invites. So you need to apply as early as possible. Ideally, that's within the first 2 weeks of June. You don't have to kill yourself to get your application in on that very first day and hit submit at 12 midnight. That's not important. But sometime within the first 2 weeks of June is a nice thing to have done. And some people say, oh, you know what, I have to wait for my MCAT score. I don't know which schools I'm going to completely apply to. Here's a quick tip. You can actually submit your application without having your MCAT score. It will be pending, and it doesn't slow down your application at all. Once the MCAT score comes out, it's done. You can also submit your application without having a full list of schools, and that's something that a lot of people don't realize. They think that they need a complete list of schools the minute they hit submit, and the reality is no, you can actually add schools later on, and it doesn't slow down your application any. Basically, the minute you add another school, once you're verified, that school will get your application the next day. So I think this is very important and things that people forget. So you can submit without having your MCAT score, and you can do so without having a full list of schools. So let's talk a little bit about the AMCAS components. What's actually involved in the primary application? And basically, it's demographic information. And that's, where you're born, what ethnicity you are, what's your address. And I want to point out a couple of things, or at least one thing that I see people do all the time that they think that, okay, this is just a section where I'm going to put my name in. How can I mess it up? Well, the reality is you can mess it up. And I know that stinks, but it is the reality. You can mess it up by basically, making simple typos like this person did where they didn't capitalize Miami in Miami-Dade. Now, believe it or not, when an admissions person looks at this application and sees something sloppy like that, it's very easy for them to throw it into the reject pile. Just imagine that you have literally thousands upon thousands of applications you're going through. You're looking for any possible way and any possible ideas to reject people with. And something as simple as that is going to be, is possible that they could reject you for something like that. Now, what else is involved in the application, in the AMCAS application? Well, the personal statement, which we'll talk about, the activities section, letters of recommendation, grades, and your MCAT score. These are really the big components of the application process of the AMCAS application. And I want to just go over one important term that you will hear thrown out. It's called the verification. Basically, the verification time is the time it takes from the minute you hit submit to the minute AMCAS says your application is actually complete. So the day you hit submit, that doesn't actually mean that your application is complete. What's going to happen is that AMCAS is going to actually connect and look at every single grade you've entered and make sure it's the same grade as on your transcripts that you sent into them. So it goes through this process that's called verification, and that can take anywhere from 1 to really 8 weeks, depending on when you submit. That's why submitting earlier is really important in this whole process. So let's talk for 1 second about transcripts and grades. So you have to send AMCAS every single transcript from every school you've ever attended since high school. So that means if you've taken a summer class somewhere, if you studied abroad, there's a lot of different components. So make sure to read over AMCAS's instructions. The bottom line, though, is that pretty much every place where you send a application to, every place that you've done a post high school class in, you're gonna have to send AMCAS the grades to. And what I want to make sure you guys do is plan ahead. Plan ahead because you have to think about, okay, if I did a study abroad somewhere, how hard is it going to be for me to get my transcripts from that place? How hard is it going to be for them to send the transcripts from Spain to the United States if you need to have that happen? or if you took a class at a community college or a college in some summer and you don't have a registration number there anymore, you have to just think about how hard it's going to be to go get your transcripts from that place. Now, it's easier nowadays with electronic everything, but trust me, I've seen this basically be a problem for a lot of people, where they wait until the last minute to send their transcripts in, and that delays everything. So plan ahead. Think about where you're going to have to get those transcripts from, and start contacting the schools right now so that you have it in line and in queue for actually submitting it. And I wanted to go over kind of how AMCAS actually sends your grades to school. So this is exactly how your AMCAS application looks to everybody who's reviewing your application. And you'll notice that they actually break down the grades into a science GPA, the biology, chemistry, physics, and math, and all other in total. And basically they break it down from freshman, sophomore, junior, and senior year. And they also have different lines for if you did some post-bac classes as an undergrad, what your cumulative undergrad GPA is, and what your graduate GPA is. So you can see your graduate GPA actually ends up on a separate line if you've taken graduate level classes than your undergrad GPA. But you can also see that people can very easily trend your grades, and you can see in this particular person's case, their grades kind of went down from freshman to senior year, and that's something that stands out amongst the admission committee. They look at this because it's very easy to kind of see a trend in your grades. This particular person ended up doing much better in graduate school, which is obviously very nice. But this is part of the reason why if people kind of struggle to get in the first time, one of the things we typically recommend is graduate programs, and this might be a place to put those in. So a quick insight into your science GPA. You've heard the term science GPA, I'm sure, many, many times. What is it? Well, your science GPA is your biology, chemistry, physics, and mathematics courses put into one basic GPA. And that is probably the most important number to medical schools aside from your MCAT. It obviously shows them how well you can do in science classes. You want to make sure that this science GPA is as high as possible. And one quick tip that I'll give you is that you can often designate your classes that are kind of on the cusp. And psychology courses often are a gray area. Basically, AMCAS's application instructions say that for psychology courses, you should classify them as non-science. However, if they are heavily biology-based, you can kind of actually push them into the biology section, and that might help bring up your biology GPA. That's extremely important at the end of the day. So if you've taken a bunch of psych classes and gotten A's in them, I want you to put those in your biology class section as long as they're biology heavy, and usually it's about 50% is the cutoff. If 50% of the class was biology focused, you can put those in as a biology class. Basically, maximize your science GPA. Designate your courses correctly so you can maximize your science GPA. We can talk to you more in detail about your individual classes and what it is that you've gone through for sure, but this is just a general idea. Now, let me for a second also talk about the AMCAS activities, which basically, this is another part of your application. It's your resume expanded. You basically have 15 activities in total that you can write about, and for 15 of them, you get 750 characters. That's 3 to 4 sentences max. It's not a lot of leeway and not a lot of room to write about your application. But it's what they give you, and it's what you have to work with. So you have to be concise and accurate and meaningful in the things you put forth in this application. Now, what are the most meaningful activities? Well, this is a new section that was created a couple of years ago by AMCAS, and basically you can choose up to 3 of your three of your activities to be your most meaningful. And for those, you get an additional 1,325 characters in addition to the 750 you got. But keep in mind, it's not one giant section. So it's not like you have 2,000 characters to write. You actually have 750, and then you have a separate line of 1,325 characters that you can write. So typically what I recommend people do is for the first 750, they talk a little bit about what the activity was, the nitty-gritties of it, how much time they put into it, where it was, how they did it, how they got involved. And then for the additional characters that you have kind of a mini personal statement. Talk about how it affected you, how it shaped your motivation to be a physician, or how it really kind of resonated with you. Whatever it might be, it can be more anecdotal, more story-like in that section. A quick tip that I like to give people is to create an awards section. And what I mean by that is use one of these activities as an award section. So you have 15 in total. Think you have 14 in total, and one of them is just going to go to listing all the awards that you've ever won in college, maybe in high school. People's eyes are drawn to one award section rather than listing each individual award in different sections, or maybe under, let's say you got a research award, you can list it under your research activity, but that often gets lost when people are skimming through an application very quickly. I feel like if you have an award section, people are drawn to these simple lists, and they can look right there and say, okay, wow, this person definitely has a lot of awards or has some interesting and important things there. Two other quick tips about the AMCAS activity section that I just want to mention. Think hard about what you're going to list as your most meaningful activity. Now, a lot of people are going to end up writing and saying, well, the time I shadowed that one physician or the time I pushed that patient around the hospital, that was the most meaningful thing that I've ever done. It might be for you, and if it is, feel free to write about it. But also just think about, okay, what is it that I'm really was most meaningful? If it was a hobby, if it was something that, really makes you different, write about that. Don't think that you always have to write about medically based activities here. In fact, when people are reading thousands of these and most of them are about the grandma that they pushed around in the hospital, it's nice and refreshing sometimes to see something that's a little bit different. So just think about that when you're putting this together. The other thing is that there's a lot of hours that you have to enter. There are people you have to enter. Who's the contact for each activity that you've had? And students oftentimes stress about this and go crazy and say, I don't know what to write. I don't, who am I supposed to write about my contact information for my hobby that I have? Don't stress about it. Write wherever you want. Honestly, no medical school has ever kind of looked into it and thought too much about it. They also worry about the exact hour count. An estimate is fine. You don't have to calculate every single hour that you've done everything. Give a brief estimate. And I know that some things have, more hours or less hours, depending on the time frame. Sometimes you do it over the summer and continue over the winter. And obviously over the winter, you have less time because you're also in school. It's okay to give an estimate. Let me talk briefly about letters of recommendation. How many do you need? Well, usually at least 3. 2 science and 1 non-science is kind of the needed letters of recommendation. That's the minimum. I often have people get additional letters, from a research PI, from a doctor you've shadowed, maybe a community service gig that you've done, or somebody else in the community that knows you. When are these due? Well, there's no firm deadline for when letters of recommendation are due. But basically, medical schools won't evaluate your entire application until those letters of recommendation are in. So it's really important to get earlier letters. The earlier, the better. I would say start asking for letters of recommendation now. And how are you going to collect those letters of recommendation? Well, there's a bunch of different services and there's a bunch of different options out there. There's the AMCAS letter of recommendation service where you can basically directly upload to AMCAS. There's a service online called Interfolio, which allows you to have a virtual portfolio of your letters of recommendation. There's the committee letter that your school might have. There's a college professional office that your school might have. So these are just some options, and every situation is going to be a little bit different. I've laid out some of the pros and cons here of the particular, different ideas that you can use and the particular different services you can use. What's best for you is very dependent on your particular situation. So this is something that you have to figure out on your own, or of course the MedSchoolCoach can help you figure this out. Think about who you are and which is going to work best for you. But remember, letters of recommendation, extremely important to get in early. Now, at this point, I want to kind of turn it over for a second to Anthony from Next Step Test Prep. And before I do that, I want to run a quick poll. And I just want to see how many of you are planning on taking the new MCAT. Basically, I want to introduce Anthony. He's, he works with Next Step Test Prep. He's an awesome guy. He scored 40 plus on his own MCAT. He holds an MD PhD from UMD NJMS. And so he's going to go through and talk us a little bit about the new MCAT. And it looks like, at least a third of you are planning on taking the new MCAT, if not more. So I think this is going to be very important. So Anthony, why don't you go ahead and take it away?
Yes, it's changing. Yes, it's going to be longer, and I'm going to spend the next 15 minutes talking about this new test. Okay? So the first thing you need to know is, yes, MCAT is getting much, much longer, almost twice as long as it was in 2014. So as you can see here on this next slide, we've got 4 sections out, and they're each over an hour long. So you have Chem Foundations, 95 minutes. You have your CARS, the redone verbal section at 90 minutes, and the Bio and Psych section, each at 95 minutes apiece. Right? So we have a much, much longer day. Now, you do have some breaks. You've got 2 optional 10-minute breaks between the first 2 sections and the last 2 sections, and you also have an optional 30-minute lunch break between CARS and the Bio section, the critical analysis section. So this is definitely going to be a long, and being able to tailor yourself to learning how to be, learning how to endure the exam is a little bit of a scary term. Exactly what we have to do: train for mental endurance. Okay? Now, what isn't changing is the style of the MCAT, the way it's looking to test you. So it's still not going to be a science exam like the exams you took in undergrad, where your professors are just looking to see, hey, can you regurgitate facts? Well, memorize this list of things we wanted you to know. First and foremost, the MCAT is and will still be a critical thinking exam. Can you analyze the science you've learned? Do you recognize the science when it's presented in an unusual format? Because that's what you'll be doing as physicians. As Hill can tell you, well, in med school, you spend a long time learning lots and lots and lots of facts and memorizing. And then the important part is being able to apply those facts to new patients that you've never seen before. And that's what MCAT's looking to do. Right? Now, while the area of science is expanding, there's more biochem than there used to be, there's more genetics than there used to be, and there's new psych and psychology, sociology material that was never on the MCAT before, it's still very basic. Okay? So we're talking maybe 1 year each of these areas: chem, physics, bio, orgo, and only 1 semester really of biochem, psych, or social is enough to get you through the exam. So remember that yes, it's changing, yes, it's longer, but it's still essentially testing a similar set of skills, skills the AMC believes will predict success in med school. So CARS, the one thing that's really being changed. So we still have chem and physics, we still have bio and biochem, but now we have this section renamed CARS. So it's just like verbal, only on steroids. So they've tweaked it. Right? So it's very much like your old SAT and ACT, only back then it was called reading comprehension, because most of the questions on those exams just require you to find details and spit them back out on the questions, literally testing your ability to comprehend what you read. CARS is not called reading comprehension for a reason. They don't just want you to read a random passage and say, oh, can you remember what you read? No. Can you think about what you've read? Can you analyze what you've read? Make deductions, inferences about what you've read. Read in between the lines. Because when you go talk to a patient for maybe 5 minutes, you're going to have about 2 minutes to look at their chart when you go talk to them. So it's your job to suss out what's important, what's crucial, what questions need to be asked in the 5 minutes you have with your patient, what's not that important that can maybe wait till later or need to be addressed. So they're looking to see, can you access information that you've never seen before, and then answer some questions about it. And they are looking to trip you up, looking to tempt you. So one of the reasons this is going to be a much harder section is that it's just longer. Before we had about 7 passages over the course of 60 minutes. Now you've got passages with even more questions spread out over an hour and a half. So this is going to be much, much, much more difficult in terms of keeping your focus and keeping your pacing up. Now the good news is you do have more time. On the new MCAT, you've got about 10 minutes per passage for this CARS section. Now, that can be good because it can give you more time. That can also be bad if you tend to overthink or talk yourself out of answers. Because unlike the science sections, all the information you need in CARS is in the passage somewhere. Right? What else is changing about the new MCAT? Well, the scores are changing. And the AAC has been very clever about how they've changed scores. So if you look here at the top of the page, the new scale scores from 118 to 132 in section. And for those of you clever students, you've probably noticed that's still a 15-point change. So the new MCAT is still scaled on a score of 1 to 15. Only now it goes from 118 to 132 instead of 1 to 15. And the AMCs expect a similar bell curve like they did before. So for those of you who may remember, generally what you were shooting for on the old MCAT was around a 30. if you wanted to attend and have a reasonable shot at getting into a U.S. allopathic school, you were looking for around a 30 on the MCAT, 30 and up. On the new MCAT, the new 30 is a 510. So that's what we're telling students to shoot for. If you want to stay competitive, be around the top 10%, you're looking for around a 510 on the new exam. Okay? Now, they expect students, the average score, to be in the 500. You don't want to be at the top of that curve. You want to be to the right of that curve. As Sahil has told you, they are looking for reasons to say no to your application. Everything you can do to stand out is going to help. And one of the best and easiest ways to stand out is just having better numbers. When they're sifting through thousands and thousands of applications a month, the biggest cuts they're going to make are largely based on numbers. Do you have the GPA? Do you have the MCAT score that they're looking for? And then once you meet those criteria, then start looking at every other aspects of your application. So this is one of the single best ways to improve your score. You don't have to take years of classwork, a few months dedicated studying, and you can cross exam. Okay? So speaking of how do you prepare, what should you use? Right? Well, there's lots of material for the old MCAT. For the new MCAT, there's very actual released information. The AMC doesn't have much data yet. So you should get your hands on everything, meaning the AMC has released an official guide. They have released one actual practice test. And about a week ago, they released an official set of practice questions. We definitely recommend you getting into these materials. There is no substitute for the real thing. Okay? You can also use the Khan Academy. So when I was an undergrad, Khan Academy was just getting big, and now it's huge. So they're an official partner of the AMC. They keep it to the level of the MCAT. It's a great way if you're a visual learner like me. I love watching videos. Great opportunity to, get feet wet if you haven't yet had formal classes on some of these topics, or maybe it's been a few years since you've had these topics. Okay. Now, next, what you want to do is have a good set of content books. So next step, the company I'm working for, the company I work with, is, we've just come out with our new set of exam books. Now, the important thing is making sure your books are limited to the MCAT. So I see some great questions about, textbooks. Should I use textbooks? What about scientific journals? So in general, scientific journals are way too technical for the MCAT. And the same thing goes for your college textbooks. They contain way too many details that could possibly be tested on the MCAT. And you'd be spending hours spending time learning material that's never going to earn you points on test day. So it's in your best interest to get a good set of MCAT prep books, not just science books. Okay? As far as tests, one of the most important aspects of applying to med school is perseverance. As Sahil said, only about 50% of students get in on their first try. I applied to med school twice. Perseverance pays off. And it's the same for the MCAT. Perseverance means taking multiple practice exams, taking the time to learn from each exam, analyze each exam. And if you study with us, we will teach you how to take and, more importantly, learn from each exam you go through so that you learn from any mistakes you made, any improvements you made. And as of now, there's only one official AMC practice test. So that's just one. Right? They're hoping to release more sometime later in the summer. Right now, there's only one, which means you need additional materials. We like to recommend around 6 to 8 practice tests so that you can walk in on test day feeling confident you know what score you're getting. Okay? The top 10 best habits of successful MCAT students are: number 1, got to start with verbal. Got to start with cars. There is no outside nudge. As soon as you find a strategy that works for you, whether it's note-taking, highlighting, or just skimming a passage, keeping track of information in cars is crucial. And there's no need to wait. There's no chapters you have to read. There's no classes you need to take. When you practice cars, you are learning how to critically think, which means when you practice cars, you're practicing the entire MCAT.
As for the science, there's a twofold practice you want to adopt. First, you need to learn the science, lay that foundation down. Then you have to see if you can handle the MCAT test science, because that is the true difficulty of the MCAT. Not in what it's testing, but in how it's testing that science. When it comes to that science, whether it's equations or theories, it's important you emphasize understanding over memorizing. Believe me, there will be plenty of time for memorizing on the MCAT and plenty of time for memorizing in med school. So whenever possible, understanding beats memorization. It'll stick better. It'll learn better. You want to keep track of your mistakes as well. So what we have is we have a lesson learn journal where you record what are you doing wrong, what mistakes are you making. The same way you keep track of your patient's vitals over the course of their stay in the hospital, you would want to keep track of the mistakes you make over the course of your prep to see, what am I doing wrong? What do I keep doing wrong? What something, can you explain it well enough so that somebody else can understand that topic? So if you think you really know circuits, you would then circuits to another one of your friends who's studying for the MCAT. Then you really know material. And the more or bigger groups you have, odds are you'll find somebody who's strong where you're weak, and somebody who's weak where you're strong, and you can help each other. Right? It's important to know what to expect on test day as well. What is that day going to look like? That means knowing you're going to be there for at least 7 hours, 4 sections, about 90, 95 each. Okay? Now, ideally, you should take the MCAT once. Do it once, do it right. That's your goal. So what you'd like to do is save your most valuable exam for later, meaning take the AMC practice as the last exam you take, exam 7, exam 8. Because med schools will see every single MCAT you sit for and record a score for. Now, some schools may take your most recent score and forget everything else. Some schools may take your highest. Some schools, they may take the highest in each section. Most schools may just average your scores. So it's important to make sure that if you do this thing, you'd like to do it once and do it right. Okay? Now, some students realize that you only allowed to take the MCAT a certain number of times. They only allow you to take it within 3 times within 1 calendar year. So you can't just keep taking it and taking it and taking it. Now, if you really felt that your MCAT score does not reflect your ability, then you can consider retaking. But that itself comes with several important questions. Because a lot of students do not see an improvement, a significant number, about 30% see a drop in their MCAT score, another 10 to 20%. So up to half of students who retest either see no difference or a slight drop in their score. Okay? So you should retest if there was a serious discrepancy with your score, meaning, you really got sick in the middle of the exam, or if there was a huge problem with your practice administration, maybe your proctor got, a little upset, maybe the power went out in the building, or if your score was so low, you don't have a chance of, applying to the schools or being admitted to the schools you want. So one of the things you need to do is research the schools you're looking to apply to. What is their average MCAT score for applicants? What is their average MCAT score for people who get accepted? Right? Now, if there's some big imbalance where you did well on the CAR section, the bio section, the chem section, and you really didn't do well on psych-soc, then sure, considering to retest. Like, all right, it was just one problem. Maybe you didn't prep right. Maybe you tried to rush the MCAT before you had a chance to learn the material. Right? Now, you have several options for prepping for the MCAT. Right? Now, there are some pros. If you want to study on your own, if you're a disciplined student, you can do that. You need the bare minimum of resources, just a few books, and you can get yourself on your way, right? Problem is, if you're not sure about what a new MCAT is, and again, these are untested waters. So being able to say, well, I'll just go find it online. I'll just go find out what everybody else has done in the past. No one is taking this exam. And it's hard to know what you don't know on the exam, right? You also want to make sure you have as many resources as possible. Right? You can also go the prep course route as well. So prep courses are great for students who are not that disciplined. So if you're on the other end of the spectrum from a self-study student, where, you'd like to have, somebody tell you where to be, when to study, and what to do each day. That's great, right? But the problem is with that, if courses get too big, that you're looking at a large cookie-cutter approach to the MCAT, where you may not get the personalized attention you need. You may not get strategies that favor your strengths or your weaknesses. And you may spend a lot of time in class learning stuff you already know. And they're not that cheap as well. Right? Now, tutoring. This is your opportunity to get your MCAT prep tailored specifically to you. So one of the first steps we do with our students is we have you take our own diagnostic to find out where are you strong, where are you weak. Not just in MCAT style thinking, but also in area of content. Because again, it's all about laying that foundation and then building on that foundation with MCAT style skills, critical thinking skills. And we work on concepts until you have mastered them. Right? Now, there is a balance. One tutoring is more expensive than studying on your own, but it's not, it's a lot more cost-effective than prep courses, right? Which is your advantage. Right? Now, a personal statement, again, Phil talked a little bit about this. MedSchoolCoach can certainly help you with this. So I saw some great questions come into the chat about the MCAT. So I'm going to turn it back over to Sahil. Again, keep those questions coming. We'll open up once we're done. And I want to thank you guys for your time. Feel free to visit our website. Feel free to let us know.
The line is now unmuted.
My personal email address into the class chat at the end of this session. Thank you. Sahil, it's all yours.
Great. Thanks, Anthony. I think that was awesome. Hopefully everybody's got a little bit better idea of what's going to be involved in the new MCAT now. Just a few closing statements before we kind of wrap this up. The personal statement, it's a beast of its own. This is so important. It's a really, really exceptionally important part of your application. You should get help on it. You should get your friends' help. You should get your English professor's help. You should get your doctors you've shadowed help. You should get as many different pieces of advice as you can on it. Of course, MedSchoolCoach, this is something we do all the time, and this is what we really thrive at doing. We have editors who've read thousands of these. We don't just correct for grammar. Anybody can do that. And we really want you to get a perfect personal statement, or a personal statement that's as good as possible. We're actually going to be holding a webinar probably in mid-April to talk a little bit more about the personal statement. But I want you to start getting writing on it right away anyway. I don't want you to wait until mid-April, as we already talked about. To close out, I just wanted to draw your guys' attention to a couple of great resources. The first is perspectivedoctor.com. This is an awesome website founded by a couple of guys out at UCLA. They've really done an amazing job in curating thousands of articles, putting a lot of material up that's going to help you in your pre-med life, help you in your application. It's all free of charge. It's great. Check it out, perspectivedoctor.com. They're also soon going to be launching a chance predictor. MedSchoolCoach works in collaboration with Perspective Doctor, and I think Perspective Doctor has great free advice, and then MedSchoolCoach kind of takes over when people need a little bit more personalized advice and need a little bit more guidance. The other, obviously, Anthony from Next Step Test Prep. Next Step Test Prep, they do one-on-one MCAT tutoring. They're great. We've sent a lot of our students to them, and I think they've all come out really well. And I think, with whatever tutoring company you choose, it's all about the people who are going to teach you. I really want to stress that. I think it's so important. So make sure you're getting great tutors, and I think Next Step definitely has them. And then, us, MedSchoolCoach, we've put on this webinar. We've put on a lot of webinars in the past. Basically, we were founded in 2007, and so far we've helped about 3,000 students through the process. Some through the whole process, some through tiny parts of the process. While we're headquartered in Boston, we work with students all across the country, and we work with the vast majority of our students virtually, so we have no problem working with you anywhere. Everybody you're working with is an actual physician, and so you're getting actual people who've been on admissions committees, interviewed for admissions committees, know the process of medical school inside and out, and can help you through basically general advising, figuring out where to apply, when to apply, if you're competitive, DO versus MD, all the kind of questions that you always wanted to ask but never had the correct people to ask to. We also help, obviously, through essay editing, personal statement, interview prep, and basically any part of the application process we can help with. And we've helped, like I said, about 3,000 students so far. And the awesome part is I think all of our students end up really, really liking us. We send a survey to our students at the end of every year, and these were our results from last year. 96% of our students would recommend us to a friend, and 93% of our students found us very helpful or extremely helpful in the application process. And I think those are some pretty good numbers. Obviously, not everybody loves us, but 96% of people love us, so I think that's pretty good. I'll take that. And so with that, what I want to do is kind of, first of all, end the session, and I hope you guys found it informative. I hope it was helpful in your application process. I hope it's going to help you along. There's been a lot of questions that are asked, and I want to touch on just a few of them. It's going to be a little bit hard to get to all of them, so I apologize in advance if we can't get to every single one of them. But feel free to contact myself at MedSchoolCoach or Anthony at Next Step Test Prep if you guys have any specific questions at the end. Our companies are always there to help you guys along, but let's try to answer a few of these questions that you guys have had coming in throughout the process here. One of the questions I saw, and I think maybe both of us can answer this, is are applicants or medical schools going to want the old MCAT or the new MCAT for this year? And my answer to that is, for this year, I think that medical schools are not going to care. They're going to probably have a pretty equal split of, I would say, 50-50 on basically MCAT, old MCAT versus new MCAT for this upcoming cycle. So if you're applying this cycle and have an old MCAT, you're good to go as long as it's strong. If you are going to think about the future, though, I think that in the future, most places are going to want to transition to the new MCAT. So if you're thinking about applying if you're thinking about the fact that maybe you have to put in a reapplication or are not going to apply this year, obviously, you're going to have to take the new MCAT. But I think for this year, the old MCAT is going to be perfectly fine. Anthony, I don't know if you have any other tips or thoughts on that.
Thank you, Theo. Yeah, I think largely it depends on when you're looking to go to med school. So if you're looking to start, next, let's say fall 2016, you're looking to submit your AMCAS this summer, start interviewing next fall, you are in this unique area where some admissions committees will be happy to look at old MCAT scores because they're still valid for a few years. Other med school committees realize that some people are having to take the new MCAT. Maybe you couldn't fit it in on time. So this next, let's say, 8 to 10 months, this application cycle, you can probably get away with having an old MCAT score and some of the new MCAT score. But beyond this cycle, let's say moving to 2016 and beyond, as Sahil said, yeah, you're going to have to pretty much, rely on the new MCAT score. As more data comes in, they're going to rely more and more on it. But if you have a really solid old MCAT score, you can consider going with that score because at least from an admissions committee standpoint, it's the devil they know. They know what the numbers mean. They know what these scaled scores mean. With this new MCAT, they're not exactly sure what it may mean yet, but you're not in a disadvantage if you take the new one.
Yeah, I agree. So another question that people look like they're having is, one question that I think I touch on is, for a non-science academic letter of recommendation, what advice on getting one from a teaching assistant really well would you give? And I think that...
Let's talk about some other questions. I see another great question about how many MCAT scores do admissions committees see? So every time you sit for the MCAT, every time you record a score and you do not void it, med schools will see that. So I took the MCAT almost 10 years ago. So if I were to take the MCAT again and for some reason apply to med school again, they would see all of my scores. They do not go away. They may not be valid after a certain number of years, but your score report will contain every single time you took the MCAT, right? Especially, and that moves forward to the new MCAT. If you're looking for more CARS practice, I saw a question about CARS practice. Next step, you can on Amazon.com. We have a great CARS strategy and practice book. You can literally got plenty of CARS passages. So yes, practice for CARS is definitely helpful. Another question I saw is, do any med schools require the behavioral sciences? Like psych, soc, anthropology. Great question. The answer is it depends. Some schools will. More competitive the schools are, they're looking to go to WashU, Yale, Harvard Med. Yes, they're going to have more requirements. So again, you can check the schools. Some will, some won't. But regardless, psych, soc, behavioral sciences are required to do well on the MCAT. And if we're looking for a master's program, so this question came in several times. Should I do a special master's? Should I do a master's? Well, it all depends. So I can let Sahil speak on this. But generally, a special master's program, if they offer you a opportunity to maybe, get an interview to meet certain GPA requirements. For example, the school I attended, New Jersey Med in Newark, they have a very, very good relationship between the special master's program and the medical school. Now, that's not the same as just getting a master's or a graduate school. So I can let Sahil speak on that. He probably knows more than I do, better than I do. So Sahil, any thoughts on special master's graduate school to maybe shore up a lackluster or not so stellar undergrad?
Yeah, the master's programs are something that is a great question, and it's really an individual thing. In general, master's programs are going to be helpful in shoring up your application and proving to medical schools, listen, I have what it takes, especially when it comes to science classes. A lot of these special master's programs are programs where you actually spend an entire year taking classes next to actual first-year medical students. And you can imagine how nice that is for a medical school to see that, hey, this person took biochemistry and anatomy and physiology with medical students and did well. And so obviously they know that you can do well, they can do well in the process. So, it's master's programs can be very good. It's an individual thing. There are some negatives about master's programs. Obviously, they cost a significant amount of money. But I think one of the things that we can certainly help you do is decide if the master's programs are right for you. And I would encourage you to contact us to see if those make sense. There's a lot more questions, and I wish we could get to.
Yes, there are. If you can demonstrate a certain level of financial hardship, the AMC does offer reduced fees or fee waivers. You would have to speak with them directly to find out what the details are. It generally requires demonstrating severe financial hardship, and that also goes for the AMCAS, getting certain, maybe not waivers, but on the application fees. If I take the MCAT in June instead of May, right? So if you were to, let's say, submit your AMCAS on the day it opens, let's say June 1st, it generally takes about 30 days for the AMCAS to process applications. So when you get that application done on June 1st, it's still, med schools don't really see it for up to a month or so. And then when it gets busier, that time can, get a little bit larger. And so Hill can speak to that a little bit better than I can. But as far as 1 month, it depends on where you're looking to apply. I mean, if you're taking the MCAT in June, you'll have your scores by early July. If you have everything else in your AMCAS application done before you take the MCAT, and all you're waiting on is an MCAT score, then, as the Hill said, you can send out your applications. Schools may look at you. They won't be able to officially consider you in most cases without an MCAT score, but they can look at you, they can peruse your application, and maybe make a first impression. And then as soon as you get that,
late. If you're not getting your application in, until like mid-July, early August, that is on the side. So you want to try and get things done, have an application complete by, let's say between June and July.
Yeah, I hope everybody can hear me. I apologize for some people who are having audio difficulties, but you're absolutely right. Taking the MCAT in June is not the end of the world whatsoever. Even taking the MCAT in July is not the end of the world. If you remember going back a little bit, I talked about the fact that you can actually submit your application prior to having your MCAT score out. Now, there's a lot of nitty-gritties and a lot of specifics per each person that I think it's a little difficult to get into every particular person's situation. But in general, you should aim to take the MCAT hopefully by June. If you have to push it to July, it's not the end of the world. What I tell people is that, if you take it in June and score 10 points lower than you would in July, you should absolutely take it in July. Basically, let's maximize your score as much as possible, but at the same time, balance it out with an early application. Another question that I think people are kind of asking about is, how do I choose which schools to apply to? Now, this is another question that I think is very tough to answer in sort of a group setting because it's a very individual question. What I say in general is that I would always have you apply to more schools rather than less. It's really important to kind of get your application in front of as many eyes as possible. When 50% of people aren't getting in, having your application seen by a ton of people is extremely, extremely important. And so in general, I say apply to more schools than less, but be within reason because you're going to have a lot of secondaries to fill out. But that's another question that we can definitely help you answer. That's another question that you can kind of, get some answers on Prospective Doctor from as well if you kind of can't afford the advice or want to just kind of peruse on your own. Check those out for potential resources. I want to just end, it's getting a little late, and certainly I know there's a lot of other questions out there, and I hope that I apologize in advance that we couldn't get to all the questions. But again, you can contact myself. I put my email in the chat room. Anthony also put his email in the chat room. You can contact any of our prospective companies to get a little bit further help. People have asked if this presentation will be available online. The answer is yes. I'll be sending a PDF of the presentation out to the people who attended, and hopefully I'll also be uploading a copy of this to YouTube for a lot of you guys to view, and we'll send you some emails with that information in a little bit of time. Thank you again, I guess, everybody, for logging on. Again, a couple of resources to check out: Prospective Doctor, Next Step, and MedSchoolCoach as places that you can definitely get a lot of great information from and a lot of great advice, test prep, help from along the process. So, Anthony, I want to thank you as well for taking the time today.
Thank you, Sam. It's a pleasure.
And again, everybody, thanks so much for logging on. I hope this was helpful. Feel free to shoot us an email again. and hopefully we can all chat soon. We'll probably be sending another email about a webinar coming up. And if you found this helpful, hopefully you'll find the next one's helpful as well. So thanks again, everybody. Have a great night. I know it's getting late, especially on the East Coast, but hopefully this helped. Take care, everybody, and good luck in the application process. Keep your head up. It's a long, tough process, but it's definitely something that you can get through. As Anthony mentioned, perseverance is one of those things that medical schools value above all else. So it's definitely, it's definitely worth it. It's gonna get you there. All right. Take care, guys. And again, email us. Feel free to email us with any questions.